Story 1. Slovakia. 1. Drinking cold beverages causes illness. Drafts cause illness. Being barefoot in your home causes illness. Getting a dog wet causes the dog to get an illness. Story 2. Working nonstop with no rest does not mean you are more successful. In reality, it often means you are burned out and missing out on life. Story 3. Dedicating a room as a prayer room exempts your household from paying local government tax. I have heard this all my life and it still persists. Story 4. German here. In Germany, many people believe the story that there was once a vote held in the early United States of America to choose between German or English as the official language. This was said to be due to the massive influx of German migrants, and the vote was supposedly decided by one German member of parliament who voted for English, making English the official language. This is, of course, false. This vote never happened, and it is easy to disprove. Just look up the United States official language. You will not find one because the United States does not have an official language. Story 5. That Ukraine being part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a national security threat. I do not understand how this is supposed to work. What difference does it make whether a nuclear missile is in the country next to your border or a bit further away? It will be game over for the whole world regardless. Story 6. Being neutral means we are safe and do not need to spend any money on the military. Nuclear energy is harmful. Genetically modified organisms are harmful too. Homeopathy, crystals, and revitalized water are beneficial. Story 7. People in the United Kingdom believe that Nigel Farage will stop the boats. The same people, some years ago, believed this about the Conservative Party, which was responsible for record levels of illegal immigration for consecutive years. Story 8. Here in the United Kingdom, people believe the political party Reform United Kingdom would do any sort of good for our country. Story 9. That a certain Russian president is an oppressed diplomat who wants only good for the world. Everything they disagree with is tied to Freemasonry or to a certain Hungarian billionaire. Story 10. We do not contribute enough to global emissions to make a significant impact, so we are fine using coal indefinitely. Renewables are often criticized, but nuclear energy is also considered problematic due to various concerns. The government cannot devise a way to implement nuclear power without incurring extremely high costs, so it seems unlikely to happen. I am convinced our population is influenced by a collective mindset that strongly supports coal. Story 11. Not my country, but people in this land, which I hope is fictional, called the United States of America, think having universal health care, not even free, just affordable, is Bolshevism and will immediately lead to the deaths of tens of millions in labor camps. Story 12. That we do not work enough. Currently, our political leader believes that Germans need to work more, and he is governing with the support of the Social Democratic Party, the supposed party of the working class. In fiction, this would be criticized as too obvious for a political villain. But in reality, they are discussing ending the rules for the 8-hour workday, which already has many exemptions. Story 13. Everything wrong in society is caused by immigrants, and the only way to solve it is to vote for the party whose sole policy is to remove them, even though they will not do so because then they lose their scapegoat and selling point. Story 14. Not my country. However, the fact that Egypt has a national holiday to celebrate its victory against Israel, a war that for the rest of the world they lost, I have always found hilarious. Story 15. Your credit score reflects your character. It shows whether you experienced illness without insurance in 2018. Story 16. Universal single-payer healthcare is communism and necessarily leads to long waits and subpar medical treatment. Taiwan and many other countries disprove this myth. Story 17. An artificial intelligence video was released of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, claiming outrageous policies such as banning lifted trucks, tinted windows, and cars older than the year 2000. I am now seeing petitions being promoted and sponsored on Instagram. Story 18. The non-taxation of the First Nations of these lands is not a benevolent act granted by Canadians, but an economic sanction against First Nation communities. This creates greater Canadian control and prevents the First Nations from raising funds to support local culture, language, and law. Story 19. Arabs are a minority, Yet there are 2 billion people globally with more than 10 ethnostates where owning slaves is legal. Story 20. If your palm itches, you are going to receive money. Or maybe when your ears itch, someone is speaking about you. Story 21. In Norway, many believe that liquor from our shops contains a substance that makes you vomit if you drink too much, for safety reasons. That is why they do not get as hangover when they go on a binge in Spain, because it is not added there. It has nothing to do with the heat or drinking more water than back home. Story 22. Quebec, Canada. Here, people believe we are more like Americans than any other culture without ever really leaving our province or traveling in the United States. Please, people, travel and meet the world. You will feel sad for Americans instead of envious. Promise. Story 23. Air conditioning of all types can make you sick. A draft through the house can make you sick. Sitting on cold ground can harm your kidneys. Beer is not alcohol. Brought to you by Poland. Story 24. Having mangoes with milk will poison you. This belief originates from the times of slavery and was used to discourage slaves working on farms from drinking milk. Story 25. That we are a Christian country. Actually, our founders made it clear that they did not want us to be. Story 26. This applies to all countries. The government is not corrupt, and they truly work for the greater good of the country and its people. Story 27. That Sinterklaas holiday is not racist. Story 28. People in Germany tend to believe that the city of Bielefeld does in fact exist. This is pure and utter nonsense. Story 29. You can use common sense to arrive at a solution for everything. They call it peasant reasoning and apply it even when they have no idea what they are talking about. Story 30. Many social media short-form videos feature ominous music and someone saying something that is untrue but does not sound immediately outrageous. Too many people believe what they hear and do not fact-check. Story 31. If there are government grants in terms of financial support, such as housing bonus, social insurance, or financial aid for people with a disability, you do not automatically qualify for them. In most cases, you have to register or fill in an application, and the government will check if you qualify. You need to ask and research what your rights are. Story 32. All supporters of Donald Trump are not racists. All of the ones I know would pass any test of liberal values with flying colors. What is interesting is that they all have a unique reason why they did not choose Kamala Harris. Story 33. Brazilians genuinely believe they invented airplanes. I lived in a share house in East London with 6 other Brazilian people. I was the only non-Brazilian person, temporarily filling a room while one of their friends was back home for a few months. It was as exciting as it sounds. We had many caipirinha-fueled conversations about crazy Brazil topics, but it blew my mind when I learned how deeply passionate they are about this. There is a backstory about a Brazilian man doing airplane experiments in France around the same time as the Wright brothers. The timing is off by a few years, but it is still widely accepted in Brazil that they were the first in flight before the Americans. Alberto Santos Dumont made significant contributions to early aviation knowledge, even though he was not actually the first. Story 34. The American Revolution was won by people who were skilled marksmen, who were smart enough not to line up out in the open, and who used their own guns. If Americans were as well armed as commonly believed, the Continental Congress would not have gone into debt buying guns from France and Spain. There would have been no reason for the British Army to seize armories to prevent the acquisition of guns, which led to the battles at Lexington and Concord. The Continental Army was struggling until the Americans learned to stand in battle lines to fight. Story 35. Not my country, but I lived in Indonesia for a while. My favorite memory was when my doctor chastised me for riding a motorcycle without a jacket, not because of road rash, but because I would get entering wind disease. Story 36. Ashkenazis are indigenous to Israel, and Zionism justifies genocide. Only half of my country and Israelis believe this to be true. Story 37. The president alone stopped the civil war in our country, with no help from other countries that were not interested in having an Islamist country as a neighbor. Story 38. More of a misconception than a lie. Scottish money is legal tender. You have to take it. It is not even legal tender in Scotland. It is legal currency, but that does not mean anyone is obliged to accept it. Legal tender has a very different meaning. It relates to the settlement of a debt and specifies which notes and coins, and maximum amounts of each, cannot be refused for payment of that debt. You do not have a debt when you go to buy a Mars bar and 20 L&B cigarettes from the corner shop. The shopkeeper is within their rights to insist on payment only in English money, Scottish money, euros, or any form of payment they choose. They usually do not, though, because they want to make money. Story 39. Puerto Rico has an identity problem. We call ourselves a country most of the time, but many believe that we are going to become the 51st state of the United States. Story 40. In Mexico, last year some news spread that a whole town in the Michoacan state tried to kill some pigeons because they thought they were witches. This became national and international news because, truth be told, that kind of event is actually quite common, and a sizable portion of my country genuinely thinks that way. I don't mean just believing in ghosts or aliens, which we do as well, thanks to Jamie Mawson for the alien memes. I mean, most people genuinely believe those things first, before any kind of logical or illogically grounded explanation. This aligns with Mexico being one of the most religious countries, I guess. Story 41. The British Empire was not a benevolent force for good that benefited all of its subjects. The truth is that apart from the super wealthy and their corporations, it barely benefited the average British person, who was as much exploited as their foreign counterparts. Story 42. The belief that the United Kingdom government cares about its citizens is questionable, especially after Keir Starmer attempted to minimize the issue of grooming gangs and tried to reduce welfare support for disabled people to fund the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's military actions. Story 43. I can think of several common misconceptions that are not true. We only use 10% of our brain. Sugar makes children hyperactive. Shaving causes hair to grow back thicker and darker. Regarding historical facts, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." In Salem, witches were burned at the stake. Actually, they were hung. Many misconceptions are passed from person to person until widely accepted. Others arise from confusing good stories with history. In the United States, Newtonian physics is primarily taught, while quantum physics is rarely covered. To be fair, quantum physics is challenging for most people to understand, but as a result, students are taught concepts that have not been the definitive explanation for over a century. Story 44. If you knock on wood, you do not attract bad spirits. You just avoid giving bad energy. Story 45. It is not entirely a lie, but in Italy, if we get a cold, we say you got a colpo diaria, which basically means a sudden exposure to cold air. However, that is not entirely true, as you get a cold from viruses. Story 46. This is an easy one. As someone who has experienced poverty, has been stable, has lived in big cities such as Tacoma and Minneapolis, and has at one time or another voted for both parties, including Bill Clinton twice, the claim that the Democratic Party is for the betterment of inner cities is false. Story 47. That rich people work harder than poor or middle-class people. Whenever taxing the rich is brought up, there is always that one person, usually from a lower income group, who says, "Why should they be punished for working harder?" Story 48. I am from the United States of America. We are the freest nation on earth. Many other countries do not offer everything that America has, and they also provide socialized medical services. Story 49. Many in my country, especially in rural areas, believe the United States of America to be a utopian place where all people are rich and nobody suffers except for criminals. Story 50. Police are here to protect and serve. If you obey the law, you have nothing to worry about from them. Story 51. They mostly believe in a great sky father who lives somewhere in outer space, watches over us, asks for our money, does nothing to help us, and says he loves us. That is God. It is baffling. Story 52. The right-wing National Socialist German Workers' Party is trying to help ordinary people. If they govern our country, it will be damaged like the United States is now. It is easy to disprove their claims by reading their plans for when they take power. Unfortunately, some people do not care about others or human values like empathy and helpfulness. As long as the right-wing party finds a scapegoat, the masses will follow them because they can ignore their wrongdoings. This approach worked over 80 years ago, and I am afraid it might happen again. Story 53. In the United States, probably the biggest misconception is that we live in a democracy. Yes, we do live in one if one's wallet is wide and filled with cash. But that is not true democracy. The premise for all these pseudo-patriotic rants, such as the claim that we have a democracy, is based on the idea of America the Beautiful and other attributes that the United States had in the past. At that time, it was only to a certain extent. Now, it is only to an imaginary extent as part of the American Dreamers Club. Story 54. We owe the First Nations something that they cannot take without our permission. To rephrase, people in Canada often believe that white colonizers owe land or something to Indigenous peoples that they do not already have. In reality, Indigenous peoples have as much free will and opportunity as anyone else. Some people have generational wealth, but that is between family members. Calling for land back is the most empty of promises. Story 55. Working hard and doing the right thing will help you accomplish the American dream. It is only a dream. Story 56. Far too many people in the United States believe that immigrants are handed vast sums of money, free housing, or even free cars. I have actually had people ask me, as an immigrant, what I spent the Visa card I received on when I arrived here. The answer is I did not spend it on anything because it did not exist, and immigrants are not even eligible for most government benefits until they have lived here for 10 years. My sponsor, my wife, had to prove she could financially support me, so I would not be spending any government money I was not eligible for. I would love to have received some free money, housing, and a car. That would have been great. In reality, like most other immigrants, I had to struggle in the beginning to get ahead and deal with discrimination along the way. Story 57. Claims that undocumented immigrants have invaded our country and that there are gangs of undocumented immigrants rampaging across the country are completely false and absurd. Story 58. Alberta separation is at an all-time high, and if Canada does not build more pipelines and agree to all of Alberta's demands, Alberta will leave to become the 51st state. Actually, no one believes that, no matter how much Alberta's leaders repeat it. Story 59. That people coming over in small boats are the reason for the problem they are complaining about is incorrect. The real issue lies with the people at the top. Story 60. Leaving your phone charger plugged into the electricity outlet when not in use will not significantly increase your electricity bill. A charger left in the outlet but not in use consumes a very small amount of power, approximately 1/4 of 1 gross, which is about 7/10,000ths of a single penny. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.